What exactly was it like being a broadcast journalist? Well, allow me to share my personal experiences with you. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ria Renouf and I am a former broadcast journalist turned marketing and comms pro. I have a number of clients based in Metro Vancouver, which is in British Columbia, and I've only been running my business now for a couple of months. I started my business in November of 2023. Today we're going to talk about the experiences I had working as a broadcast journalist, which I did for just about 10 years. It was something that I was actually never wanting to work towards. I just sort of fell into it completely by accident, which, to summarize the story briefly, my aunt was killed in a hit and run a little more than, I want to say, probably 12 or 13 years ago at this point. Now, because it was just my mother and I living in Metro Vancouver, there was really nobody to speak for our family, and typically when there are hit and run appeals done, the best course of action is to have a family spokesperson so that people are more likely to come forward and give tips, because having a relative obviously would pull ideally on the heartstrings of the people who are watching these appeals. The person was eventually arrested. They pleaded guilty, I believe, so it did save us a trial. And they ended up doing some time. They also had a 2-year driving prohibition, but ultimately my aunt died because of it. Now, I know a lot of families have had situations where they haven't been able to find peace, so we were one of the fortunate ones where we did find out who was responsible and what exactly happened that day when she was run over and left to die on her own. For me, that was an opportunity to see the good that journalism could do. On a whim, I had decided to apply to the Broadcasting and Online Journalism School at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. I ended up getting in, and I actually got a job 4 months into my program. I started working at a radio station. For a little bit I reported, but eventually I ended up becoming the assignment editor, so I was the person who was responsible for the reporters. I had help because I was so new to the industry. I was only 5 or 6 months in, and so I had a lot of help from some intermediate and senior reporters to figure out what the day would look like, and I also had help from my news director. So there are a lot of misconceptions out there about journalism, and I just want to preface this little list by saying that my experiences are unique to me, and while I can't speak to the here and now of it, I want to speak to the experiences I had as a journalist for 10 years. So I was in radio for a number of years, and that was followed by a couple of years, or a couple of 1 year rather, on television. I'm glad I have that experience under my belt because I can take a lot of these things. They're very transposable skills, and a lot of what I learned then is being applied now in my business. And the first thing I'm going to go through is it is not glamorous at all. I was an assignment editor. No one ever saw me. And, you know, I didn't really have to dress up and be fancy. And it was funny because I was in news, so people think that most folks will go in there in a suit and tie. But I think you see a lot of management really dressing up, which is really common if you have to be around a meeting table. And this was especially during or before the COVID-19 pandemic. So you'd see a lot of management all dressed up, but it was really common for journalists to wear like jeans and a nice shirt, or, you know, a nice top, a nice blouse. But for somebody who was anchoring on the radio, it was super chill. There were just some days where the hours were so awful. I would work from 2 a.m. to noon to try and make sure that my work was getting done and getting done well. So there were just some days where I actually wasn't able to do my laundry, and, you know, working 5 days a week. And especially when your hours are really messed up, you don't have the luxury of doing your own laundry, you know, on time. So there were some weeks where I was really tired, and I just poorly planned, poorly executed the way in which I lived my personal life, and the laundry was definitely a sacrifice. The second thing is people think that it's a hub of activity. Now, maybe back in the day, even 10 years ago, I would say it really was a hub of activity. You know, you would have reporters come in and out. They would check in with you. They would call your desk and say, hey, what am I assigned to today? which actually leads into the next point that I'm going to talk about. But when I was working in television, it was very, very lonely. My studio only had 2 or 3 people for the show in at a time, and that would have been the technical director, the reporter who was hosting the show, the 6 p.m. and the 11 p.m., and then a producer who would tell you what was coming up next, especially talking about numbers and how many people were sick and how many people had died during the COVID-19 pandemic every single day, because you would get press releases. When you start to think about the fact that these aren't just numbers, these are people, and thinking about all the people who passed away from the pandemic. With radio, it could be even lonelier. You know, I worked a couple of overnights when people were on vacation, and sometimes you were the only person in the room, and it was really, really hard. You and then the technical producer who would fire off any ads for you. So the way it usually would work, at least in the first radio station that I worked at, was you would read 4 minutes and 10 seconds of news, and then that would be followed by some ad breaks and a traffic report and the weather. In the station I worked at afterwards, you were sometimes reading for 45 minutes straight at a time. I remember when the Capitol riots happened and we had to throw out all our ads and run emergency coverage, which is one of the scariest, terrifying things you can do, because they throw out all the ads and you basically have to talk nonstop. You are just talking. So there's a lot of stuff that, while it might seem like it is a hub of activity, if it is a hub of activity, people are usually pretty stressed out and they're just trying to make it through their shift. And sometimes you don't get to just say, okay, 8 hours, I'm done. Actually, there's a lot of times where it's been like that. You sometimes stay an extra couple of hours so that you can help the next team that's coming on understand what is happening in this breaking news situation. My first day in television was the shooting at the airport, at Vancouver International Airport, and it was in broad daylight. I was training. I wasn't even supposed to be on. And so they handed me a mic and said, we need you to go down to Vancouver International Airport. We need you to shoot an on-cam. And that's that you're gonna have to just do that. So I was terrified, but I made it work. And it was an incredible experience for me. Now, before I got into the second point, I talked about, you know, how I alluded a little bit to how stories are covered, and the majority of the time, I would say 99% of the time, you do not know your story before you start work. It is atypical to know what your assignment is going to be ahead of your shift starting. So just to give you an idea, typically in radio, I would send out the assignment lists at 8 a.m. and I would start at like 3 or 5 in the morning, depending on how the schedule went, to make sure that I was doing my job right and that I hadn't missed anything, because if I did miss any news, I got into a lot of trouble. And there were probably only 3 or 4 times where that actually happened in a span of 5 years, so I was very lucky. For television, your day usually starts at around 9 or 10. You sometimes go into those meetings and you don't have a story, and that is the most terrifying thing. You would get into a meeting and they would go, well, we don't really have anything for you, so you'll probably hang out for a little bit and edit some B-roll for some of the other stories, something that we call VOSOT, so voice over sound on tapes. So the anchor will start off with a voiceover, or like they'll deliver the copy for the story, and then they'll cut to some clips of something that's happening. But it was very common where I would walk into these meetings and I would pitch stuff and they would say, actually, we want you to hold off because we're hearing that an announcement is coming down at 12:30, which is even scarier, because then you have from like 12:30 to essentially 4 p.m. to make sure that you have the visuals that you need, and your package usually should be done by 5:30 p.m. There seems to be this idea that everybody knows in advance, but you don't. There are also situations where you'll have pitched something and they say, okay, go ahead and do it, and then a shooting happens or something catches on fire. I've been in many cases where I had pitched an enterprise story, so something I had worked on for many weeks, and then I had scheduled some shoots for a particular day because I wanted to get the information, all the voices needed to tell the story. and people were only available for my enterprise story on a very particular day. And then you get a call from your newsroom saying, we need you to go down here because it sounds like somebody's been shot. In radio, it's a little bit more flexible because if something comes up, sometimes your desk can take care of it for you. And that was something else that I was really okay and comfortable with doing. So instead of assigning it to a reporter, I would just put the calls out myself and take care of it so that they could focus on their story. If they were done their story early, then I would say, hey, could you help with this? Could you pick this up? Could you do a follow-up on this? And I think the last thing to talk about is hair and makeup. I got this question so much when I was working in journalism. Oh, who does your hair and makeup? I did my own hair and makeup. I think it's really common in American, like very large market American newsrooms that they do have makeup artists, but it's becoming more and more common now to hear of makeup artists being laid off. And even when I was in the television industry, you know, I did my own hair and makeup. It was very common to, especially as a video journalist, you know, sometimes you look like you've been really put through the ringer. So if you had to, let's say, shoot a story and you were working from 10 to 6, but then they had you hosting for whatever reason. So if you hosted the 6 p.m. and just think about this. You have been out driving around all around Metro Vancouver trying to get people to talk to you for your story. And then you have to come back, you have to cut your piece within like an hour and a half. And you're coming down from that adrenaline rush from being scared, you know, will I get my package in on time to my desk? And then you have to go host a show. You have to actually look presentable. You have to read through the script. I was very lucky that I was able to ad-lib. I have the gift of ad-libbing. I'm able to just go without a script. But I've worked with some people where that is terrifying for them. They don't want to ad-lib. Being able to be in that right mind and then also having to do your hair and makeup, and that's why I tried to keep it really, really simple. You know, I focused more on picking bright colors as much as possible. I looked for cuts in my clothing that were very polished. For me, like it's a challenge for me to find clothing that is really stylish and cool and functional. I'm sitting there doing my hair and makeup. I'm trying not to spill makeup on my clothing and making sure that I look presentable. I will say that before I actually got into journalism, I was a makeup artist. I did have the benefit of being able to do my own makeup. My hair was an absolute mess. I just left it straight because I wasn't very good at doing my hair. Anyways, those are some of the points that I wanted to touch on. I know that we could have done so much more for this video, but I only have so much time, and I'm curious to know what you think are some misconceptions about broadcasting and journalism, because hey, maybe I'll come back and do another video on that. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something new, don't forget to leave a comment below and let me know what you learned. Don't forget to subscribe if you're interested. I post videos here every Wednesday and Friday, both days at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye!